this week, beginning the 22nd of March, the sun is going on a journey, and it's not just simply moving through Aries and asking us to begin again. It's a moving through a far more initiatory sequence than that. And as it enters the sign of its exaltation, it is going to meet with Neptune and beginning its application to Saturn, and then it will make a sextile to Pluto towards the end of the week. So this week is one in which the solar principle, and that's our sense of self, our purpose, our vitality and direction, is being shaped by vision. It's being tested by reality and brought into contact with deeper transformative power. What begins now is not just a fresh impulse. It's a question of what inspires us, disciplines us, and what kind of power are we prepared to hold. So welcome back, everybody. Soul Symbol is Astrology, and my name's Karen Sullivan, and you're all very welcome here. As I give the astrology, take what resonates, what glitches in you, and work with that throughout the week. So before I bring the chart up and look at the sun's conjunctions this week, I want to say something about the condition of the sun itself, because that's going to give us a deeper texture to this whole sequence. So as I said, the sun is exalted in Aries. So that's the solar principle being heightened here. So we may have that energetic of courage, animation, emergence, and acquire a will to begin if we haven't had one. There's the feeling, that sense of life pressing forward with purpose here. Aries is giving the sun a kind of nobility of fire. It will be bringing a readiness to act, to lead, to initiate, and to come fully into presence. So even before we get to Neptune, Saturn and Pluto, we're already dealing with a sun that is in a place of distinction and strength. So let's get the charts up and have a look at what's going on here. Okay, here we are. So this story, it's not as pure as just, that Aries fire. Aries is ruled by Mars, and as you can see, Mars is here in Pisces. Now, Mars in Pisces isn't witnessing Aries by whole sign aspect. So the ruler of the sun sign, it's not directly testifying to the sun here, it's not witnessing. And this is, I think that really matters because it's giving the exalted sun here a different kind of texture. So the host is present, but it's in what's called aversion. It can't see the sun. It's right next to it here. Look. So Mars still disposits the sun, still colouring the ground the sun is walking on, we could say, but he's doing so without a direct line of sight. So it's not the clean, sharp, unambiguous fire of Aries operating on its own terms here. The ruler being in Pisces softens and sort of complicates the field. It's bringing in water, permeability, feeling, vision, sacrifice, imagination, grief, mysticism, all those watery gifts of Pisces. It's suggesting that the solar fire this week is being ruled by a Mars that acts through intuition and atmosphere rather than that blunt assertion or that big old sword that comes and cuts away decisively. So the sun may be exalted in Aries, but the quality of action underneath it is less straightforward, more porous, more inwardly guided, and perhaps it may be even more conflicted than Aries first appears here. But then there's another layer here, which I really like, and it's the fire triplicity. Aries is a fire sign, so we can look at the triplicity rulers. We've got Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. The sun as a day ruler speaks to illumination, vitality, our identity, and that power to act from the center. And Jupiter as the night ruler is bringing the principles and significations of meaning, trust, expansion, vision, and a sense of greater horizon. And remember that Jupiter is up here in Cancer. So it's bringing that, it's in the moon's temple, it's bringing that sense of nurture, care, protection from there. So Saturn, as a participating ruler and is here in Aries, brings form, endurance, discipline, and consequence, that gravitas of Saturn. And what's so striking about this week is the sun is not only moving through Aries in its exaltation, it's also moving through a sequence that's activating the whole fire triplicity. The sun is itself present as a radiant principle here, and it's moving through the bounds of Jupiter here. That's the bounds of Jupiter in these early Aries degrees. So Jupiter is quietly almost underwriting the terrain with those questions of meaning, faith, and larger purpose. And then the sun perfects its conjunction with Saturn, bringing the third ruler of the fire triplicity in a very explicit way. So the week carries this full fire signature, inspiration, conviction, and testing, but also that vitality, meaning, and structure. So even minor dignities here deepen the story. These early degrees are in the bounds of Jupiter's, but also in the face of Mars, which is the ruler of Aries. So the sun's entire journey this week, conjuncting with Neptune and Saturn, and lastly, sextiling with Pluto. I'll just show you that. Here we have conjunction with Neptune, Saturn, and there's the sextile to Pluto, but it's all taking place under Jupiter's bound and Mars's face. So it's a beautiful combination for what we're seeing. Jupiter's bound gives these early Aries degree a bigger frame of meaning, belief, and future orientation. And Mars's face is giving that heat, urgency, boldness, that raw desire to act. So the sun is exalted in Aries, moving through Jupiter's turns, Mars's face, whilst ruled by a Mars in Pisces that isn't directly witnessing it. To me, this is saying this is a week of potent beginnings, but beginnings that are, not just that forceful martial energy. They're inspired. They're going to be tested, and they've got a moral texture here. There's fire here, certainly, but it's fire moving through vision, responsibility, and depth. So let's get you back here. Just a minute. Okay, so I think I said it in as I've shown you the chart, but this week has got that very strong initiatory quality that Aries bring. But the sun isn't just moving. There's this sense of it being refined, tested, and shown something about vision, responsibility, and power. And because this is all taking place in the very earliest degrees of Aries, there's something especially raw and archetypal about it. So it's all archetypal, but this is coming across as strong to me as I looked at the chart. So Aries is in that first sign. It's that emergence. It's that primal thrust of life, the spring coming, the first strike of a match, the first spark of spring. It's that moment when something pushes forward and is basically saying, I exist, I begin, I'm moving. It's that sort of energy. So, as I said, the sun's exalted in Aries, so there's real strength here with the sun. There's potency and that sense of the solar principle being heightened, animated, and empowered in the sign of initiation and fire. So, a very strong signature to the astrology this week. But also, what makes this week interesting is that this solar fire is not emerging into an empty space. It's emerging into Aries and then straight onto Neptune and then Saturn and Pluto. So it's almost as though the new solar impulse is immediately confronted with three questions. And that will reflect onto us. What do you believe in? What are you willing to commit to? And what will you do with the power? And that, to me, is this week, the sun's journey through into Aries. So let's begin with that first movement where the sun conjuncts Neptune at the first degree of Aries. So this contact begins with a very particular atmosphere into the beginning of the week. And that can be that energy of heightened sensitivity, inspiration, and an imaginal openness of vision. And that will be trying to push through, that force of Aries trying to push through. Ren Butler, who I love, I haven't got his book here, in the Archetypal Universe, he speaks of the light side of the sun and Neptune as a serene and radiant nature, enhanced access to imagination and inspiration, impulses towards spiritual self-discovery and a higher purpose, and a perception of divine meaning permeating creation. And I think that's a beautiful way of understanding the opening note of this week. Because when the sun meets Neptune, the ego is not going to remain hardened and fixed in a way that it sometimes prefers. It's going to become more porous. So the self becomes more open to influence from the imaginal, the spiritual, the symbolic, the collective, and the soul. Obviously, I'm loving this energy. So there can be a sense that something greater is trying to move through us. There can be more dream activity, more intuition and symbolism, more longing, poetry, tenderness, but that feeling that life is being saturated with meaning. So this is how we open, straight after equinox. It's beautiful way for the sun to enter into Aries. So with Aries, this can feel like a beginning of new vision or desire or a sense of calling. Or we might have a new image of ourselves or the future emerging here. So it's though the fire of Aries is receiving a dream or spiritual charge or a kind of invisible prompting from beyond the ordinary personality. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. Plug into it, people, this week. So for many of us, the beginning of this week, and quite frankly, right throughout, because the sun is not fully separating from Neptune, but it can feel really inspired, bringing us that heightened sense of possibility or a feeling of wanting to trust something, but not having it fully formed yet. But just that sense that something beautiful is emerging. A bit like before the daffs come up when we're checking out if the daffs have broken the soil. So you may not have all the answers here or be able to describe what is going on exactly, but there'll be a sense of feeling that beautiful energy moving through us. And sometimes the sun and Neptune just work like that. They don't arrive as a plan, that energetic. It's a mood and a calling, an image, a longing, a vision, a prayer. It's a deep inner current that is likely to run through us, even if we can't name it. But then, of course, Neptune's never only light, it has its shadow. And again, I'll go back to Ren Butler. He names the shadow very clearly. He says tendency towards self-deception and escapism. So watch, shopping, drinking, whatever your vice is, whatever you do to escape. Dissolve feelings of selfhood uncertainty, he talks about, and a lack of purpose or direction, and a potential for psychic inflation. And I guess this can happen because we can have that inspiration, the images, the dream. Okay, so check out your inflated sense of self. Yeah, but we need to watch it because not every vision we get is true vision that we're meant to follow, and also the feelings of destiny. Sometimes they're not grounded. There can be projection here and fantasy. And as I said, inflation. It can be the ego becoming enchanted with its own image of meaning. So the beginning of the week can carry both that genuine inspiration, but also uncertainty. It can bring beautiful spiritual sensitivity, but blur our direction. And it might bring that heightened imagination, but also kind of vagueness. Okay. And there's also, Neptune and the sun will be bringing that perception of higher purpose, but we need to be aware of over-identifying with a dream, a role, or a fantasy version of ourselves. So the question under the sun and Neptune conjunction, although we need to ask about what we're inspired by, we need to be asking what's true and real, what belongs to spirit and what belongs to projection. So basically, we need to check out things that could potentially be fantasy or not based in reality. And it's especially important because Aries usually likes that direct line Mars, and it likes straightforward action and decisiveness. But with Neptune here, that it's like fire moving through mist. So the beginning isn't clean and sharp. It's not that sword like martial Mars energy. Okay, it's luminous and a bit diffused. So it's not a week to assume that clarity means speed. It may take time to unfold. So sometimes that real task under Sun and Neptune is to let yourself receive, listen, feel, and notice what's moving through the deeper waters of your psyche, your soul, without rushing immediately to define it. And then, of course, although the Sun is within a day of that conjunction, it's applying to Saturn, which is actually in a 3-degree orb of Saturn. It's exact on the 25th of March, and that will bring, although it's still connected, it's separated from Neptune at this point, and it will bring a real change of atmosphere here. Because there's that dissolution, that blurring of boundaries and reality with Neptune, but Saturn's a definer. Okay. Neptune as well is like that open boundary feeling, whereas Saturn will pull those boundaries in for us. And where Neptune spiritualizes things, Saturn is about bringing things into the material. It's about solid reality. So there's that enchantment of Neptune, but as it moves with Saturn, all that enchantment and that vision and that inspiration is going to get tested. So we have vision here meeting the reality of Saturn. Saturn's looking for structure, and he's asking what labor is required for this dream to be reality. And have you got the time? Can you be responsible for it? And what is the consequence of moving with this sense of vision or direction? So let's refer back to Rem Butler. This is going to be a very Rem Butler because I'm looking at the archetypal texture very much here. So Sun Saturn for Ren Butler, it's really resonant here. He talks about qualities of responsibility and self-discipline, modesty and integrity, authenticity and centeredness, defined self-consciousness, and a focus on work and duty. It's very different from Neptune, that kind of lovely boundless energy of Neptune. So this is the part of the transit that is going to be asking, can you actually carry what's been revealed? Can you bring a form to that inspiration and embody it? Okay, so reality test here. And this is why I think the Sun's conjunction with Saturn is so important in this sequence. Neptune can open that imaginal field, but Saturn is asking whether the self has enough maturity to bear the vision without drifting into fantasy or performance. So Saturn here is asking for integrity and character, and it will be requiring a coherence between what we say, what we believe, and what we're prepared to live. And in Aries, this is particularly interesting because Aries is quick, instinctive, initiating, full of movement. And by contrast, Saturn is slow, careful, he's boundaried and concerned, as I said, with form, bringing whatever it is into form and reality. And Saturn's he's in his full in Aries, so he's not really that comfortable here. So there can be a real tension, but that urge to move, may have restraint coming in here, or your desire that you had at the beginning of the week may meet resistance. And that fire of self-assertion will have a demand upon it here for discipline and patience. So this conjunction of the Sun with Saturn this week might feel like a sobering point. It may feel like a reality check, okay? it may feel like the moment in which something has to prove itself. Okay, so it can be, the tension can be deeply constructive. It can bring that steadiness to our work, our thoughts, ourselves, and a seriousness, but definitely a more authentic sense of purpose here. So we can take hold of a vague inspiration and begin to forge it into something that is real and tangible. But we've also got that heaviness again. It can expose fear and inhibition, and also Saturn, shadow Saturn can bring self-doubt and fatigue. And also it will show us what the limits are. So Ren Butler says of the shadow, it can be rigid ego structures, inhibited vitality and confidence, slavish identification with one's work or social role, habitual self-denial. So we need to look at those shadows as we move through the week. So this Sun-Saturn conjunction might bring up the places where we've made identity too narrow, or where we only know who we are when we're being useful, responsible, productive, or dutiful. Yeah. And those places where our vitality has been constrained by either fear, duty, or just pure old self-restriction, that Eight of Swords energy. So it's the places where we confuse authenticity with harshness or maturity with denial. Yeah, so under the Sun Saturn, we may be feeling or seeing things that we're actually responsible for, but also how we've constructed our image of self for survival. But this is why I think this conjunction to Saturn is about seriousness in a mundane self, but it's also about the testing of ourselves. That self that was softened, opened, and inspired by Neptune has to pass through the furnace of form, that test. It becomes accountable, defined. It has to choose what it's actually willing to stand for. And in these days and times, it's very good to know what you stand for, because the polarization in society has become so much. So it's good to look at those things in terms of what will we stand for, what vision, what way do we envision the world? Neptune is about oneness, going back to source, devotion, all that type of thing. And Saturn's really asking us to be accountable for that vision, to bring form to that vision. So in that sense, this week will probably be asking us for a mature kind of courage, not that youthful courage, that impulsive, maybe adrenaline seeking courage, or that kind of dramatic assertion, but just courage. And it takes courage to take responsibility for our own lives and directions and actions, or our vocation. So it's that courage to become answerable to the deeper truth that we've seen. Okay, that may not just be this week. It may be Neptune opening up and bringing to fruition a vision that we've been nurturing, that's been opening in us for some time. And then the culmination of the Sun's journey, it's going to come into sextile with Pluto at 5 degrees of Aquarius, and it's going to bring some depth work here. It's Pluto, okay, Lord of the underworld. Pluto intensifies everything and exposes. Okay, so he's drawing the Sun into contact with those deeper currents of instinct, our will, shadow, desire, compulsion, potency, transformation. So we've got Neptune dissolving the ego, Saturn defining the ego, and then Pluto forcing the ego into relationship with what lies beneath it, if that makes sense. Okay, so he's culminating. So it's really important this week that we look out, that we hold the two sides of our character, the paradoxes that are there within us, the light and the dark. We don't have to resolve them. We just have to be aware of them and work with them, because at the end of the week, this is what Pluto is definitely going to be doing with the Sun and Pluto. So Ren Butler again, what does he say about the Sun and Pluto? He talks about intense enthusiasm and drive, and connection with those primal natural energies, the interplay of ego and shadow, the struggle for self-conquest, and surges of creative potency. So That's such an important phrase, the struggle for self-conquest. Okay, we're constantly, or many of us are constantly, and if you're here watching the astrology, I'm guessing that, you want to have control of yourself. Okay. The thing about Pluto, he's best. Um, the power, I mean, some people, we will this week on a side note have to watch, because the sun is about these solar figures, leaders, kings, it's associated with kings. And we may see some quite disturbing power grabs or power moves with what is unfolding in the world. But for us, at his best, Pluto is about coming into a more conscious relationship with the underworld within us, that unconscious. It's about what's happening when the self becomes aware of its own motives, shadows, our own appetite for power, um, our own fears, and our own buried life force, really. And once that contact is made, that possibility of transformation emerges. As I said, we need to hold the whole of us. We're not trying to get rid of our shadows. We're trying to hold the whole of what we are as human beings. We have lizard brains. We have primal energies in us. We're not trying to get rid of them and be nice. We are trying to hold the polarities and the paradoxes within us and outside of it. That sextile to Pluto this week can bring access to power and our will. And it will definitely bring, if you're working alongside it, creative intensity. It can bring that sense that something deeper is available to us now. So what's been tested by Saturn can become empowered by Pluto. So it's not just that raw intensity for its own sake. It's what happens when something survives contact with reality and therefore gains that depth and potency. And that will be the work of, Neptune bringing the vision and Saturn connecting it with reality. And then Pluto is going to bring that beautiful depth, okay, and empowerment. And because Pluto is in Aquarius, there's also that collective note to this. It's going to bring about those questions around power within systems. I mean, my God, we don't need the sun sextile Pluto. I think we're all questioning about the power within systems. And within collectives and ideology and technology and social formations within that wider field of how we organize ourselves as humans. So expect some real shows of power, and that might be, palatable power or very unpalatable power, given the shadow of all these planets, Neptune, Saturn and Pluto. The shadow, if we get those shadow aspects within the collective, within leadership, and there's some not nice sort of stuff can come out there. There's no easy way to put it. Okay. But this sextile to Pluto can also suggest that this week has got that deeper relationship to collective transformations already underway. So it's not simply private. There's a sense of the self finding its place in relation to the largest structures of change, larger power dynamics, larger evolutionary currents. So really, we need to be tapping into that, particularly if you're involved in activism or you're involved in collectives of any sort. This is a beautiful time to become empowered this week and move out with those visions of, imagining a different world and bringing that about. But again, Pluto has the shadow. So Rem Butler again, Rem Butler, anyone? Where's my Rem Butler book? I don't know where it is. He's describing that shadow as, and this is why I mentioned about leadership, solar figures in this way, a ruthless and driving nature, urges to dominate and control others, a willful flaunting of one's sexual and shadow energies, obsessive self-expression and self-celebration. I mean, I think we can look in the world and see all that on display at the moment, but there may be an intensification of that. Okay, so be aware of that. So that Sun Pluto sextile can be really deeply empowering, but it also asks us questions. What happens when the self feels more power? What's your relationship to power? Um, what happens when your energy to will returns? And looking at when that intensity comes online. Um, So how are we dealing with that given the shadow? Is that going to transform into courage, creativity, shadow integration, self-conquest, or does that become control, obsession, domination, like a really unsavory egoic force? Look in the world for that, but also know that all those things resolve, all those possibilities reside in all of us. Hold the paradox. If you're conscious of it, it can't project out like shadow while you're unaware. If you're aware of those forces within you, you can hold them. You can hold them and make conscious choices. Okay. That question is the culminating question of this week for me, because if the Sun Neptune conjunction is asking whether we can receive vision without losing ourselves, and then the Sun Saturn conjunction is asking whether we can embody responsibility without becoming rigid, then the Sun Pluto sextile is asking whether we can access power without becoming possessed by it. So the whole week can be understood, another of my favorite things, as a kind of alchemical solar journey. First, the Sun is passing through Neptune, and something of the ordinary self is dissolved. That might be a dissolution of ego here. The self can become more porous and receptive and inspired, but that less certain often comes with that. That is why people call it the dark night of the soul, when the ego breaks down. Okay, you're porous and uncertain, often really confused and vague. Um, and then the Sun passes through Saturn, and the self is then being given a contour, weight, and responsibility form. And that question becomes not only about what we're dreaming of, what our dreams and visions and ideals are, but what can we actually build, sustain, carry, or commit to? They're questions you may want to ask yourself this week. And then the Sun is meeting Pluto by sextile. And what has passed through inspiration, discipline, is now coming into contact with transformative power. Something more primal is available. Nothing wrong with primal. A good primal scream is good for the soul, yeah. But it's something more potent, and it requires that consciousness, as I said. If we're conscious of it, we're not, projecting out a shadow. It requires integrity and willingness to face that shadow. Not easy things, people, for sure. If you find that easy, pop a comment in the box below, okay? So, yeah, I would say that this is a week in which inspiration must be disciplined in order to become transformative power. Or if you want a catchy little phrase to mantra, to get to speak to yourself, that the vision is given, the self is tested, and the power is revealed. And really, joking aside, I think that this is why this week feels energetically so rich. It's really rich, because none of these contacts are trivial. They're all contacts to major archetypal principles. Neptune, Saturn, Pluto, vision, reality, power, spirit, structure, underworld. And the Sun is touching all of those, and each one of them are asking something of our identity, our vitality, and our consciousness. And that will be individually and collectively. So in practical terms, what might this look like? At the beginning of the week, you might feel really inspired, receptive, and spiritually open. A sense of being more permeable to subtle currents, more open to your intuition, but perhaps less certain. So you may be feeling a pull of a vision. This is Aries, remember? It's initiatory. It might be not a vision, a longing, a dream, or that deeper symbolic sense that something is beginning. So just let that be there, but don't assume that everything you feel has the clarity it maybe needs. Okay. Because as this week moves on to the 25th, the tone will probably, the energetics will become more sober and serious, and they'll be more exacting. So you may be asked to make decisions, to define something, to commit, work, face limitation, or to take responsibility for what was previously only an intuition. They got this funny thing, dreams and inspiration and intuition. We have to embody them and create them. We don't have to, but that's the purpose of it. So that can feel a bit heavy, but it's also where integrity is forged here. And then as the sun moves sextile with Pluto, there might be that sense of deeper power becoming available. So we may have a sense of a stronger will or willpower increasing, or a deeper clarity. But also it can bring that uncompromising contact with truth. It can be truth about the situation, truth about ourselves, and that sense that something hidden can be faced, used and transformed. And here the invitation is not to dominate, it's to become more conscious in relation to power itself. So definitely not a shallow week, definitely not just a week of activation. It's a week of solar initiation, okay, into our own identity and our collective identity. But I think one of the most beautiful ways of holding this is the sun begins in Neptune, where we must remember that life has mystery, that meaning isn't reduced entirely to control, and the inspiration comes through surrender as much as effort. Then it meets Saturn, where it must remember that spirit without form just evaporates, poof, and that our vision, if it doesn't have discipline, it will fade away. And purpose requires our commitment. And then the sun will meet Pluto, where it must remember that real transformation requires honesty, shadow work, and a willingness to engage power at a deeper level. So perhaps the deeper invitation of the week is to let the self be inspired without becoming inflated, disciplined without becoming hardened, and empowered without becoming controlling. That would be the highest expression of this sequence. So as we move through the week, pay attention to where vision is arising, where reality is demanding more of you, and where power is gathering beneath the surface, whether that's within you or you're seeing it outside of you, because the sun is showing us something about what it means to begin well. So we don't just want beginnings that are quick, dramatic, but beginnings that are going to carry that vision through and in a way that's going to withstand reality and hold power with integrity. And this is the work of the week. And if you're feeling the tension of it, that will just make sense. Neptune can blur, Saturn can weigh things down, and Pluto can intensify all of that. But taken together, they're not simply to confuse or burden or overwhelm. They're there to refine the solar principle, to deepen it, to make it more conscious within us. So this is a week to move carefully, not fearfully, to listen deeply, take responsibility, and not to collapse into self-denial. So we need to claim our power, but not become possessed by it. And we may see some power possession going on outside there in the world at an even more alarming rate than it's been. The sun in Aries wants to live, begin. It still wants courage, fire, movement, and emergency. But this week, that fire is being initiated into something larger, something much more soulful, something more ethical and transformative. And that is what makes this such an important week in our sky. So I hope that you can draw something out of it. I wish you beauty, depth, and big dreams for this week. All right. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.